So I am going to welcome Rachel Coyle. Rachel is the policy lead with Honesty for Ohio Education, uses she, her pronouns, and Rachel's going to be leading us in a conversation about how the state house works. Rachel is an expert and knows all things Ohio politics, especially with the state house. So really excited for you all to learn from Rachel.
Hey everyone. So we are going to do a quick overview of what lame duck session is and how it's different from some of the legislature goings on that you've been seeing in the last 2 years now. And then we'll talk through some tips and tricks on testimony. So first thing to know is I always start every presentation with this slide because you have so much power at the state and local level. It is unbelievable. It's disappointing because the reason for it is that so few people pay attention at the state level. But it also means that it doesn't take very many people to sound really loud at the state house. You do not need to know thousands of people to make a huge difference at the state house. You really have a ton of power if you make those phone calls, if you show up and testify. It really matters. But the other side of that coin, of course, is that if you don't use that power, if you don't use your voice, it doesn't take a lot of voices on the other side to get really harmful things across the finish line. So we have to use our power, and we are going to teach you tonight how to do that. All right, so first are some terms that I'm going to be throwing around, and you probably need to know them. It'll also help you understand why we have a lame duck session. So the first term is General Assembly, or GA. That it refers to the State House, but it also refers to the 2-year period that they operate in. That is critical because any bill that gets introduced in the State House has those 2 years to go through the whole process. House, Senate, governor's desk, signed into law. If it gets most of the way through, but doesn't complete the whole process by the end of the 2 years, that does not matter. It doesn't matter how far it got. It will still die and have to be reintroduced at the beginning of the next 2-year term, the next GA. And so what happens then is at the end of every 2-year term, you end up with what's called lame duck session, which we are about to hit. And it is where every legislator in the state house is trying to pass pretty much every bill that they've introduced for the last 2 years into law all at the same time. It is chaos. They know it's going to be chaos. They actually tend to hold some of their most controversial bills for this session. And the reason for that is partially because everything's moving so fast, but also because if you look at the timing there, you can see that our lame duck session is going to happen November 12th of this year to the end of this calendar year, December 31st. And I don't know if you guys have heard, but there's an election next week that's taken up a lot of oxygen in the room. It's taken up all the news, it's taking up all of the activists' time and energy. People are going to be exhausted by politics. They're going to want to turn their phones off and their computers off. They're going to want to turn off their TVs and go to their families for the holidays and not think about politics. And unfortunately, that is exactly when Ohio's lame duck session begins. And so we actually really need to be paying attention during this time. And I've been telling everyone to take a break in January with me. And then the next term to know is session. That has two meanings. One is the time of year when the legislators are working, because technically being a legislator in Ohio is a part-time job. And then another reason for using the word session is the times that they're physically in the state house or Senate, voting on bills. All right, so another term you need to know, because this is Ohio and our current makeup is such that you need to know this term, is supermajority. So I give this presentation in a lot of rooms. I don't care which party you are. Supermajorities of any party are bad. They are bad for democracy. They basically get rid of the checks and balances that we all learned about in junior high. And they make it so that one party in one branch of government basically can run everything exactly as they want it with no checks or balances. So that's what we have in the state house right now with the Republican Party. There, you can see there's so many members of the Republican Party in the House and Senate in Ohio that Governor DeWine, who is also a Republican, if he decides to veto something, he decides a bill is too extreme or whatever, and he decides to send it back to the legislature, they have enough Republican members that they can override that veto, force something into law all by themselves. It really creates a lot of the extremist legislation that we see. And so it's going to be important to know that dynamic as you're headed into lame duck this year. All right, so we covered most of this already, but I just want to highlight the current belief is that lame duck this year is going to start November 12th, so that's the week after Election Day, and it's thought that it's going to end on late at night on December 19th. That's the current schedule. That could change at any moment, as literally anything can in lame duck, but that is the current belief. So our hope is that we won't be asking people to come back for a day of fighting after Christmas, but TBD. And I think we've all talked through the rest of this. So next slide, please. All right, so one thing that is big during lame duck that you need to know about, they're called Christmas tree bills. And we already know there's at least 2 of these being planned for this lame duck session. And this Christmas tree is an actual example of a bill that was passed a couple years ago. So what they will do is they will take an existing bill and they will add a whole bunch of other bills to it as amendments. And they call it a Christmas tree bill because the other bills are like, think of them as ornaments on your tree. So this is an actual thing that happened a couple years ago. This is SB 331. I use this as my example because it still makes me so angry. It's been many years and I still think about this bill because the main bill was bad enough. It deregulated puppy mills. Yes, you heard that correctly. But they also threw a bunch of other stuff in there, like they removed local control over cell tower placement. They banned communities from raising their own minimum wage. They allowed employers to have exclusive authority over work hours and scheduling. So they really hurt local workers. And basically they did all these different things that seem completely unrelated. And then they found this like tiny excuse for why they were related, which I believe was local control, like taking away local control and animals somehow. I don't really know because a lot of people sued saying that they were not actually using one subject. But you will see at least 2 bills like this in the lame duck session called Christmas trees, where they'll throw a lot of the bills that you've heard about all year, all 2 years, into one bill as amendments. All right, another thing you're going to see is floor amendments. So this is unfortunate because I spend my whole life teaching people about the State House process and how a bill becomes a law. And then we get to lame duck, and you will literally see times where they want to skip the entire process of committee hearings and testimony and all of that. And they potentially could add a bill that you've been following to another bill, literally on the House or Senate floor, so that it can be passed without the whole committee process. It's very frustrating because it is not how the bill making process is supposed to work. And a lot of what we can do is we'll be paying close attention, and our partners will be paying close attention to literally discussions happening in the halls of the State House. We're going to be listening for like inside conversations so that we can be fighting back against the potential for floor amendments when people start to negotiate to have them, or when people start to hear rumblings that a floor amendment might be coming. Because if we get to the point where they want to add a bill as an amendment on the floor, if it gets that far, it's hard to stop it. So we are going to be listening a lot, paying attention at the State House, and trying to call legislators out in advance so that they don't do this kind of thing. And then next slide. So one of the other things you may see, and this is one of the main reasons we're here tonight, is there are going to be I invented this one. This is not a real committee notice, but one of the things you're going to see is committee notices sent out very, very soon in advance of the hearing that's happening. So in Ohio, there's a rule that you have to send your testimony in 24 hours before the hearing starts. And during lame duck, there's probably going to be a few times where you get a committee notice, you get an email about a committee that's happening tomorrow, 25 and a half hours from when you are getting the email. So that means you only have an hour and a half to submit your testimony. So one of the things we want to do tonight is prepare where you start drafting testimony that you know you're going to want to submit, and you just have it ready to go so that when Honesty sends out like an urgent email asking for testimony, you've already got it and you can just send it in. This is very likely to happen during lame duck. Another thing to notice is that at the bottom there are the committee rules. The committee chair sets their own rules, and sometimes during lame duck, they will make very frustrating rules to try and cut down on the number of people who can testify. So you always just want to read that bottom paragraph there and see what shenanigans they're up to. And then obviously that was a ton of like stressful information. And one of the best things you can do to keep yourself grounded is to follow these advocacy organizations. And we'll send you a list of them. This is a tiny, tiny sampling of all of our many amazing partners, but they will help you narrow down bills to focus on. And they will also help you, like they'll sound the alarm when big things are moving so that you don't have to feel like you have to follow everything yourself. Following the advocacy organizations is a way to keep yourself sane during this ridiculous process. All right, so a couple ways to prepare. One is write your testimony now. We're gonna work on that tonight. Another thing, if you want to have social media content, Twitter, unfortunately, is still the best place to be for this kind of session because reporters are there. And if you can get a reporter to pay attention to a lot of people tweeting about something, then you could potentially make a difference. So sorry to tell you, still have to be there. But one of the things we can do in advance is prepare our social media content now so we're ready to throw it out there if a bill moves really fast. There's also a committee notice list. I'm going to ask you all to sign up for those for committees you care about, and I'll walk you through here how to do that. And then prepare yourself to use the phone because making phone calls is one of the fastest and most effective ways to impact the legislators during this process. But here, next slide, please. And I'll show you how to, yeah, so I'm saying call, right? So it's not like calling Congress. They're not taking down your information. You are calling an office of a legislator. They only have, you're calling the House, they only have one staffer. If you're calling the Senate, they only have two. So you're calling the same people over and over again, and building a relationship can be really, really helpful. But in this moment of chaos, the reason you want to call is because you want to take up that staffer's time. At the end of the day, you want that staffer to go to their boss and be like, oh my God, I got nothing done today because everybody hates that book ban bill. That is literally how you make a difference at the State House in this moment of chaos. So we want to be calling. We want the staffer to remember the people that kept them on the phone and what bill they were talking about. And then it also is very important to call because they only have one phone line. So if you call, they have to listen to your voicemails. The senators are calling, or the senators' staff are calling each other on the same phone line that you're using. They have to listen to those voicemails. So call, leave a message, ask for a call back, and a lot of times you will actually get a call back. It's really remarkable how often that happens. And if you build a relationship with that staffer, going back to the small number of aides, they can help you out in these moments. They can get you insider info if they hear it on the halls of the State House themselves. If they like you, if you're nice to them and you've built that relationship, it's very valuable. They can sometimes give you like tips on when your bill is coming up, that sort of thing. And yes, you can absolutely call legislators who do not represent you because so few people are contacting the State House. You can call people who are like the committee chair for a bill you care about, or the House Speaker, things like that. Absolutely reasonable to do that. They will be expecting it. But if you do end up calling your own legislator, definitely mention it because there's some power to it. All right, so I'm going to quickly walk you through how to sign up for those committee notice lists because this is crucial. This is literally how any of us know when a bill is going to be moving, what type of testimony is going to be accepted. And so if you sign up for the committee notice list, which is an email that you get when a committee is going to be meeting, you will know as fast as any of the rest of us when your bill is going to be moving. So I'm on legislature.ohio.gov here, which we'll send to you. And then I'm going to click on the committees tab and go down to Senate committees. Just click, it'll go to the next page. There you go. And then see there's an arrow pointing to all the committees there are in alphabetical order. I recommend signing up for several because education bills sometimes float around various committees, but for now we're going to click on the education committee. And that the chair is always listed first in the committee because they are the most powerful person. They are the person who decides what the committee rules are, which bills move and which don't, which bills get hearings and which don't. And they're the person you're going to contact with your testimony. And they're in the Senate side, they're the person you're going to contact to get on that committee notice list. So I'm going to click on Senator Brenner's face here. And then it takes you to his page. And on the left side, there is his contact information. You can contact his office, phone or email, and ask to be placed on the Senate Education Committee notice list. They'll take your email address and you'll start receiving those emails whenever the committee is going to meet. The House has made it a lot easier for us. Someday the Senate will catch up, but this is the same website, legislature.ohio.gov. Clicking on House committees now, picking civil justice, because some of our ed bills are there this year. Oh, look, a fancy button. It's so nice. Why has the Senate not figured this out? But you can sign up for the House committees very easily right now while we're on this call with the mailing list button on each committee page. But I also want to show you that blue arrow there, yeah, is the bills tab. So this shows all the bills that are being heard in this committee. And if you click on the bill number, you can, this is a different committee because I needed an example. But if you click on a bill number, you can go and see all of the existing testimony that has been presented on this bill. So these are previous hearings, testimonies, supporter and opponent testimonies, and interested party that have been uploaded. You can read them. You can look for arguments for and against your bill to get maybe ideas or arguments you want to push back against. It really is very helpful. And if you testify on a bill, your testimony will be uploaded in the same format. And we'll send this to you. This is a lot of information, but I have a resources thing we can send. All right, so quickly talking through testifying, we want everyone to come and testify if they can. Testifying in person is incredibly valuable because you get to be in front of the legislators, have a back and forth. You get the press in the room sometimes, and sometimes you end up with a story that quotes you. It can be really helpful to get your story out there. But we tend to make it difficult to come and testify in person. We tend to have hearings at like 10 o'clock in the morning on Wednesdays, and I can't tell you when the hearing will end. I can only tell you when it starts. So you do often have to end up giving a bit of your day to go and do that. So if you can't testify in person, you can testify written only, which is still an official part of the process. It'll still be up on the website. The legislators will still have it in front of them on an iPad. It will be an official part of the government record. You just won't get that back and forth with the legislator, and I can't promise you that they'll read it, but it is still very valuable, especially if you get large numbers of people to send in testimony, because then people who support the bill can point to it and say, look how many Ohioans cared enough to submit this testimony. This is a bill that Ohioans want or don't want. Still a very, very important piece of the process. So the cool thing about submitting testimony is that it is so easy that the entire process is on this one slide. So step one, you're theoretically going to do tonight. You're going to write your testimony. Step two is once you get that committee notice, because you're all going to be on the committee notice list after tonight, you will email your testimony to the committee chair. The committee chair is all powerful. You send it 24 hours before the hearing. And you have to do that even if you're doing in-person testimony, even if you're showing up, you still have to send it 24 hours in advance. One note that I will say is during lame duck, sometimes they will let you fudge a little bit on that, especially if they know that they're being shady with like 25 and a half hours before the hearing. Sometimes they will let you still submit within that window, but oftentimes, and again, it's completely up to the chair, they will be rigid with that 24 hours. And then in addition to emailing your testimony, you have to send them a witness slip, which we can send you a generic one. It's just basic information like if you're a lobbyist, if you're with a group, that kind of thing. That's literally the whole process. We should all be submitting testimony all the time, but a lot of Ohioans don't know they have this ability. That's literally it. You email your testimony, email your witness slip to the chair, and then you either show up or you're officially part of the written record. All right, and another cool thing is the shorter the better. Truly, like a few sentences is perfect. It does not have to feel like a term paper. And in fact, it shouldn't, because a lot of times if there's a lot of testimony, they'll cut it down to 1 to 2 to 3 minutes per person. So you want your testimony to be short so you can get it all out. I also tell people to consider your audience. Supermajority of Republicans in the legislature means supermajority of Republicans on the committee. So think of that conservative uncle that loves to talk politics at Thanksgiving. That's going to be who you're talking to. Obviously, you can write whatever you want, but just keep in mind who you'll be talking to. And then I'll send this to you as well. And I think Matina sent one out earlier, just a very quick template to show you how simple it is and how short your testimony can be, but also lets you feel confident that you're formatting your testimony the exact way that all the professionals are doing it. This is laid out in the exact way that all the lobbyists are going to be writing theirs as well. So you can feel comfortable that yours is laid out just the way the pros are doing it. And we'll send this to you. I think Matina sent one as well. And then if you can't get there, we do have the ability to watch committee sessions or committees and session live online on ohiochannel.org. It's free, you don't need a subscription, and the videos are archived so you can watch them later. You can pull clips if you show up to testify, you can clip yourself. It's shareable, it's a really valuable resource that we have. And then I think that is it for me.
Thank you so much, Rachel. And yes, I sent an email to everybody registered for this session. So it has a PDF of the testimony template. It has a docs one. So if you have Microsoft, like you can use that. And then also I linked to a webpage on our website, which has the witness slip and also like a bunch of resources about testifying and other actions that you can take at the State House. We will send it out again. So if you missed it, there will be another opportunity, but it lives online 24/7. I am now very excited to introduce Ainsley Johnson Brown. Ainsley is an Ohio native with a passion for localized policy and advocacy work. With a background in data analytics, strategy, and law, her trifecta of experience is bolstered by a desire to do work where it counts, which can be evidenced by her volunteer work with Children's Hunger Alliance, Legal Aid Society of Cleveland, and Ohio Public Banking Coalition. Since her completion of her Juris Doctorate at the University of Akron School of Law, Ainsley has published several law-reviewed articles focused on LGBTQ+ rights and racial equity. When she is not gliding through the weeds of policy work, she enjoys spending time with her wife, Jade, and her fur babies, Raekwon and Shaolin.
Hey, hi, hello. That bio introduction sounded way more formal out loud than it did in my head. So all that Matina said is that I am a really big nerd, and I spend a lot of my time trying to figure out how to crack this mystery. And I'm so excited to have you all here so we can talk about this together. And so, wait, am I? Okay, great. What I want to accomplish today is two things. I want you to be able to walk away with an understanding of the purpose and the impact of your public testimony. I'm going to build on some of the things that Rachel laid the amazing groundwork for. And then we're going to explore some select persuasive tactics that may be outside of or a little bit beyond what is typically shared in public sessions like this. But I am going to offer some tips and tricks both for lay people that want to be able to convey the story, which is totally what this process is for. And then also I'm going to challenge some of the advocates and experts to lean in a little bit more in being able to put some of the stuff that we do and that we know on the public record. So why do we testify? We have talked since elementary school about being involved in the civic process and having our voices heard and making a stand, and all of that stuff is incredibly important. I myself happen to be a constitutional law nerd, which means I like to look at the very few rules that this country has set for itself, and then look at the rules within which each state has set for itself, and then try to hold them accountable to that. And so some of what I have to share today is some specific tactics that I think are useful in our particular scenario, because having the trifecta that we do in government and state government, we all know that we are fighting an uphill battle with a lot of the legislation that we want to see move forward and a lot of the legislation that we want to stop. And so with that in mind, while it should be enough to, tell your representative about your experience and impending harm or your fears, and have that be enough to tip the scales, we have found that sometimes that is not enough. And so what I'm offering today are some tips and tricks that must be considered, even outside or beyond your legislators' personal discretion. I think there was a question in the chat around whether or not it is fruitful to call your legislator, contact your legislator, knowing that that representative is not going to vote the way that you were advocating for? One, yes, absolutely. I think that that conversation was pretty robust in the chat. But also, we are going to talk about some ways that that testimony could help organizations like our friends at the ACLU, who, after these laws are passed and technically enacted, then go in and file lawsuits. And some of what we will be able to add to the record will be able to help those brilliant legal minds be able to point to some concrete evidence that quite frankly, the judges have to consider. So, why do we testify? Judicial review of legal challenges, and that's just a fancy way of saying what the judges have to consider when someone files a lawsuit and says, hey, hold up, wait a minute, these are all the reasons why this law is not a good one. And so there's a couple of things, right? And so I think that we are all very familiar with the idea of a legal precedent, right? Like once something has been decided, generally that is now the new rule, the new law, until legislators have created a different statute. Now things have gotten a little weird since the Supreme Court decided to just undo Roe v. Wade and give us Dobbs. So the rules are a little bit more blurry than they used to be, but that is where some of these techniques will come in that will be helpful and useful to us as we know that how important the election is and the race is for our state Supreme Court. And there are a lot of different ways that vote could fall. And that being said, what we will have to offer are things that no matter who is sitting in those seats, they are definitely required to consider. And if they don't, then the next legal challenge is up to the U.S. Supreme Court, in which we have some precedent around some Ohio laws getting turned over because they did not adequately consider some of the testimony that was given. So what I'm saying, or what I have to share today, is it's a little technical, it's a little tedious. Feel free to unmute, ask questions, pop questions in the chat. But this is also a proven method of, it's kind of like the Hail Mary when all things else has failed. This is a method that we can use to continue to have our voices heard in the process. And so one of the things that you all may remember in 2023, as we were advocating for the Reproductive Freedom Amendment, there was a lot of controversy, or a lot of manufactured controversy, right, around the idea that the word person in the language could refer to a minor, right? And that was a lot of, the conversation that was had, a lot of the scare tactics that were used were, this word person, it's legally ambiguous. And I could argue either way that it is an adult in the way that most of us intended when we cast our votes, or, the argument that person, it's not defined as somebody that is of a certain age. It could be a minor, and therefore this thing could go off the rails. And so when that happens, when there is a term that could be interpreted in more than one way, and there is not a legal precedent that the courts have to follow, the judges are required to analyze it's called the legislative intent of the law to help define that particular term. And so the legislative intent is analyzed using a number of different tools, but most importantly is the testimony that is submitted on the record during the committee hearings, and then testimony that is offered on the floor. And so think of it as a way, this testimony is your ability to testify in a trial that has not yet happened. And so what happens is, and I'll use the example of, I think in real time, we are looking at HB 68 and the legal challenges around that, right? And so one of the things that if the judges do things the way that constitutionally they are supposed to do them, they have to look at all of the testimony that was given, right? And it's the personal anecdotes, it is the statistics, it is the yes, that is correct. Sarah asked the question, giving testimony is a way to help define and shape what that legislative intent is. And even if we know that everything we have to offer, they don't care about, or by they I mean the legislators don't care about, well, when it's under judicial review and the judges have to say, well, wait a minute, under the Constitution, and I'll get into the weeds of that in a moment, it is what was offered on the record, on this public record, isn't logically connected to the outcome. And depending on the type of rights that are inherent in that bill, which are things that are argued, depending on the process that was involved in enacting that bill, there are different measures of how closely connected all the logic in that testimony and the outcome has to be. And so if there is enough evidence in the ways that we talk about, like we talk about this gender-affirming care ban, and we talk about the number of people that it impacts as being a super minority, and the extent of harm, and all these things that we know, then one of the things that we are been asking the judges to decide is that, hey, given all the things that these legislators needed to consider to form their legislative intent, right? What they were offered, what is on the record, it doesn't match. And therefore, they use a term that's called arbitrary and capricious. It's not important. It basically means these guys made it up and they can't do that. And so then it's like, no matter if it was a unanimous vote, how they came to that conclusion, it gets called into question by the testimony that's on the record. And so that is the way in which we can continue to kind of stack things on our side, even though the numbers are not necessarily on our side. Because, yeah.
Is that for both spoken and written testimony?
So yes, it is. And one of the things, actually, I'm just going to go ahead and get to tips and tricks. I'm going to differ a little bit from what Rachel said. First, let me say, if this is your first time testifying, or you are looking to share your personal experience, please, 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 please feel free to do that in the way that feels most comfortable to you. And explain yourself, or don't explain yourself as much as you feel comfortable with. What I'm going to challenge, I know that a lot of the people that are in this audience today we serve the clients, we are the advocates, we are the quote unquote experts in the state. And so I'm going to offer some ways to put in the information that we publish in our reports and that we share in our coalitions as part of the official record that has to be considered. Even if they say we considered it and decided that it didn't matter for all these other reasons, they still need to articulate that, and that has to make sense. And so what I'm going to suggest is that you think of your written testimony as kind of a published report, right? If you're not telling a personal anecdote or an anecdote of someone, uplifting the voice of someone that you know, feel free to get into the weeds, as into the nitty gritty in what you submit in your written testimony as you think is necessary, because again, those are going, once that law ends up in court as challenged, everything that you offered goes along with it to the judge for consideration. And so I would challenge you to think of your oral testimony as more of a TED Talk, right? You've got 2 to 3 minutes to convince, that conservative relative that, maybe they should think twice about what is happening. And so I would think about splitting things up that way to the extent that it makes sense. But again, the fact that you are testifying and that you are getting your perspective, your voice on the record is the most important thing. And as we have said before, there are no real requirements for what is submitted and what isn't. And so we want to make sure that I want to make sure, and I will make sure that I space for this in the reproductive breakout room that we have. But I'm also hoping that this doesn't intimidate. Yeah, exactly, Natalie. And I'm sorry, I'm just kind of responding to the chat in real time. But that being said, when we're thinking about maybe some statistics or studies that we want to reference in our written testimony, well, one, so many of our coalition partners are so brilliant, so bright, release research reports on statistics specific to our jurisdiction. But until those are offered on the record, our legislators have no obligation to consider those things, right? So as you are looking for ways to substantiate what you are in support, because we are still under the idea that facts do matter, at least for now. So while facts matter, we want to make sure that we are tying those facts to places that then, again, remember, we're really thinking about our friends at the ACLU that are gonna have to fight either for or against this bill after the supermajority does whatever they're gonna do, right? And so being able to point those brilliant minds to those credible sources so that they can source them in their legal briefs is, to the extent that we already have that information at our fingertips, it is just moving the dots a little bit closer together for those that are fighting with us. And so our primary goal is to provide some information. Think of it as, again, an opportunity to testify in that trial, either supporting that bill, defending that bill, without actually being there. Think of it as a very informal affidavit. Think of it as your way of kind of pressing the scale. And so, again, I'm going to offer an example of precedent with the U.S. Supreme Court. In 1975, there was a case where the Supreme Court decided that an Ohio statute was invalid because the way that it came about, it said that the people affected did not have an opportunity to be heard. There was an issue with school suspension and the way that the suspension was handed down, and the context with which they allowed people to testify did not allow some of the people that were then affected and lost because on a state level we have a right to education. That state constitution, really, the U.S. Supreme Court said, hey, you are violating this, because it's a constitutional right on the state level. It is a fundamental right, and because it is a fundamental right, you have to have gone through the very strictest of procedures and analysis in order to take this right away. And they were able to successfully overturn a statute in that way. So I know that I just said a lot, and again, I live for this very, very nerdy, very, very heavy stuff. So I'm going to drop my email in the chat. If there are questions that you think of that percolate beyond this, I would love to talk to you about it, because this is what keeps me going. With that being said, I'm going to throw it back to you, Bettina.